The blood trail stretched across the dusty path, leading to the abandoned barn, crimson droplets stark against the parched earth of Texas in the summer of 1875. Olivia Montgomery followed the trail with growing dread, her heart pounding against her ribs as she lifted her skirts to move faster. She had only been in Wilson for 3 weeks, barely enough time to establish herself as the town's new schoolteacher, and trouble was the last thing she needed. The barn door hung partially open, and Olivia hesitated before pushing it wider. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the wooden slats, illuminating dust motes and creating thin golden beams that cut through the shadows. A pained groan came from the far corner. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Is someone there? Are you hurt?" Another groan answered her, followed by a shuffling sound. Olivia gathered her courage and stepped further into the barn. Her eyes adjusted to the dimness, and she made out a figure slumped against a pile of hay. "Oh my goodness," she gasped, rushing forward. The man was tall, even in his crumpled position. His weathered hat had fallen to the side, revealing thick, dark hair. Blood soaked the left side of his shirt, and his breathing came in short, labored bursts. Despite his obvious pain, his right hand moved reflexively to the holster at his hip as she approached. "Stay back, madam," he warned, his voice strained. "You're bleeding," Olivia stated, ignoring his warning as she knelt beside him. "Let me help you." "It's nothing," he said through gritted teeth, even as his body trembled with pain. Olivia met his piercing blue eyes with determination. "It's something to me," she replied firmly. "And unless you want to bleed out in this barn, you'd better let me take a look at that wound." His expression softened slightly, perhaps from surprise at her forthright manner, or maybe just from pain. "You always this stubborn with strangers, madam? Only the bleeding ones," she said, already examining the wound. "I'm Olivia Montgomery, the new schoolteacher." "Figured as much," he mumbled. "Heard they were bringing in someone from back east." He winced as she gently moved his shirt. "Name's Frank Calloway." "Well, Mr. Calloway, you've been shot," Olivia said, trying to keep her voice steady, "and not too long ago from the looks of it." Frank attempted a smile that turned into a grimace. "Noticed that myself. Who shot you?" "Nobody worth mentioning." Olivia frowned, carefully tearing a strip from her petticoat to press against the wound. "This needs proper tending. My boarding house is just past the edge of town." "Can you walk if I help you?" Frank's eyes widened. "A ladies' boarding house? I don't think Mrs. Whittaker's is hardly a ladies' boarding house. The old woman rents to anyone with money." Olivia tucked her arm under his uninjured side. "Besides, I have medical supplies there and no one will think to look for you." "Look for me." His expression turned guarded. "I assume whoever shot you isn't finished with the job," she replied pragmatically. "Now, are you going to accept my help, or would you rather I fetch the sheriff?" Frank's jaw tightened. "No sheriff." "Then it's settled." Together, they staggered to their feet. Frank was heavy against her but stronger than she expected for a man who'd lost so much blood. They made slow progress out of the barn and toward the path that skirted the main street of Wilson. "You're new to town," Frank said between labored breaths. "Why risk helping a stranger who could be an outlaw for all you know?" Olivia kept her eyes on the path. "Are you an outlaw, Mr. Calloway?" A pause. "Not exactly." "That's not particularly reassuring." Despite his pain, Frank chuckled. "I rode with the Texas Rangers for 5 years, left the service 2 years back. Now I work as a hired gun sometimes, but only for the right side." "And which side shot you today?" "The wrong one." They reached the modest 2-story boarding house just as the sun began to set. Olivia led him around to the back entrance, praying that Mrs. Whittaker would be occupied with her evening whiskey in the parlor. Frank collapsed onto Olivia's small bed while she hurriedly gathered supplies. Clean bandages, a needle and thread, whiskey for disinfecting, and a basin of water. His face had gone alarmingly pale. "The bullet went clean through," she said, examining the wound. "That's fortunate." "You know something about doctoring?" Frank asked weakly. Olivia dampened a cloth and began cleaning away the dried blood. My father was a doctor in Boston. I assisted him often. Boston, Frank repeated. Long way from Wilson, Texas. Yes, well, she poured whiskey over the wound, causing him to hiss in pain. I needed a change. Most Boston ladies don't change all the way to the frontier. Olivia threaded her needle. I'm not most Boston ladies. This will hurt. She began stitching with steady hands, trying not to notice how Frank's muscles tensed beneath her fingers or how his jaw clenched to keep from crying out. When she finished, she bound the wound tightly with clean bandages. You should rest, she instructed, wiping her bloodied hands on a cloth. I'll bring you some food and water. Frank caught her wrist as she turned to leave. Why are you really helping me? Olivia looked down at his hand on hers, then met his gaze. Because 3 weeks ago I arrived in this town knowing no one, and not a single soul offered me help unloading my trunks or finding my way. Because my father taught me that healing is a sacred duty. Because... She hesitated. Because you have kind eyes despite your obvious attempt to appear dangerous, Frank's expression shifted from surprise to something softer. You see a lot for a schoolteacher. Part of the job, she replied, gently freeing her wrist. Now rest. Over the next 3 days, Olivia managed to keep Frank's presence secret from Mrs. Whittaker and the other boarders. She claimed illness when necessary, bringing food to her room under the pretense of eating alone. Frank's strength returned gradually, and with it came stories exchanged in hushed voices late into the night. He told her of growing up on a small ranch near Austin, of joining the Rangers after his parents died in a smallpox outbreak, of the loneliness of the trail and the justice he'd tried to bring to lawless territories. Olivia shared her own tales. Her father's death 2 years prior, her broken engagement to a man who couldn't understand her desire to be more than a society wife, her decision to accept a teaching position in the West, where women might forge different paths. On the 4th morning, Olivia woke to find Frank fully dressed, buckling his gun belt. You're leaving, she said, sitting up in the chair where she'd been sleeping. Can't impose on your hospitality forever. His tone was light, but there was something guarded in his eyes. Besides, there are men I need to find. The men who shot you, Frank nodded. They robbed a stagecoach 2 weeks back, killed the driver and a passenger. I was hired to track them down. And then what? Olivia asked quietly. Bring them to justice, dead or alive. Frank's expression hardened. That depends on them. Olivia stood, suddenly aware of how improper their situation was and how little she cared about propriety compared to his safety. Your wound could still reopen. I've had worse. That doesn't reassure me, she crossed her arms. At least let me change your bandage one last time. He hesitated, then unbuttoned his shirt. As Olivia unwrapped the old bandage, her fingers brushed against his skin and she felt him tense. Sorry, she murmured. Don't be, he replied, his voice rough. She worked in silence, aware of his gaze on her face. The wound was healing well, pink around the edges but clean. You have a gentle touch, Frank said softly. Olivia secured the fresh bandage, then reluctantly stepped away. There, that should hold. Thank you. He buttoned his shirt, then reached for his hat. Miss Montgomery, Olivia, I'm not sure how to repay your kindness. Stay alive, she said simply. That would be payment enough. Something flashed in his eyes. I'll do my best. He moved toward the window, his usual exit route to avoid being seen. Wilson's lucky to have you teaching their children. Perhaps someday they'll agree, she said with a small smile. The school board wasn't entirely pleased with a female teacher, especially one with radical ideas about girls learning mathematics. Frank paused with one leg over the windowsill. Their loss if they don't recognize what they have. He hesitated, then added, I'll be back this way after I finish this job. I'll be here, Olivia replied, wondering why her heart suddenly felt too large for her chest. Teaching radical mathematics. His smile transformed his face, erasing the hardness and revealing something younger, almost boyish. Then he was gone, disappearing into the early morning mist. Olivia told herself she wouldn't wait for him. She had come to Wilson for independence, not to pine after a wandering gunslinger with dangerous work. She threw herself into teaching, introducing her students to literature beyond basic primers, organizing nature studies, and yes, ensuring the girls learned their numbers as well as the boys. The town began to warm to her methods, particularly after several farmers commented on their children's improved abilities to help with accounts. Even Mrs. Whittaker grudgingly admitted that Olivia had some sense, high praise from the cantankerous landlady. 2 months passed with no word from Frank. Olivia refused to acknowledge her disappointment each time a rider passed through town without being him. Then, one blustery October afternoon, a commotion erupted outside the schoolhouse. Olivia dismissed her students early and stepped onto the porch to find a crowd gathered in the street. 3 men on horseback were leading 2 others, bound and slumped in their saddles. Sheriff Davis stood in the center of the street, his stance wide and authoritative. Her heart leaped when she recognized Frank among the mounted men. He sat tall in his saddle, looking healthier than when she'd last seen him, though a new scar cut across his left cheek. His eyes found hers instantly, as if he'd been searching for her in the crowd. "These the men who robbed the Meridian stage," Sheriff Davis called out. "2 of them," Frank replied, not breaking his gaze from Olivia's. "Third one's buried outside Lerdo. They didn't come quietly," the sheriff nodded, gesturing to his deputies. "Get them locked up. Judge will be here next week." He approached Frank, extending his hand. "Town's grateful, Calloway. Stagecoach company's got a reward posted." Frank dismounted, finally looking away from Olivia to shake the sheriff's hand. "Just doing the job, Davis." The crowd began to disperse as the prisoners were led away. Olivia remained on the schoolhouse steps, her heart pounding as Frank approached. "Miss Montgomery," he said, tipping his hat, "school seems to be going well." "It is," she replied, acutely aware of curious glances from townspeople. "Your wound healed properly, I see. Had a good doctor." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Might I call on you this evening, properly this time, through the front door of your boarding house?" "Mrs. Whittaker might faint from the shock," Olivia said with a small smile. "But yes, you may." That evening, seated in Mrs. Whittaker's formal parlor under the old woman's suspicious gaze, Olivia and Frank exchanged careful conversation about the weather, the school, and local news. Only when Mrs. Whittaker dozed off in her chair could they speak more freely. "I thought of you," Frank said quietly. "Every day." Olivia's cheeks warmed. "I worried about you." "No need. Your patching up held strong." His expression grew serious. "Olivia, I'm staying in Wilson for a while. Sheriff Davis offered me a deputy position. You're accepting?" She asked, trying to keep the hope from her voice, thinking on it. He leaned forward slightly. "Depends on certain factors. Such as whether a Boston-educated schoolteacher might consider keeping company with a former ranger turned lawman." Olivia felt a smile spreading across her face. "She might, if he promises not to get shot again." "Can't promise that," Frank replied honestly, "but I can promise to always come back." Their courtship progressed under the watchful eyes of Wilson's residents. Frank proved himself a capable deputy, and his association with the respected schoolteacher helped cement his position in the community. Olivia discovered that having a notorious gunman as a suitor significantly reduced the school board's complaints about her teaching methods. Winter settled over Texas, milder than the Boston winters Olivia had known but bringing its own challenges. Frank helped repair the schoolhouse roof and built shelves for Olivia's growing collection of books. She attended town meetings at his side, offering thoughtful suggestions that gradually earned the respect of even the most conservative citizens. On Christmas Eve, Frank invited Olivia for a ride outside town. They traveled to a small rise overlooking Wilson, where Frank had prepared a picnic despite the cool weather. "Not exactly Boston common," he said apologetically, gesturing to the sparse grass and scrubby trees. "It's perfect," Olivia replied, genuinely meaning it as she looked at the vast expanse of sky stretching above them, After they ate, Frank grew uncharacteristically quiet. He fiddled with his hat, turning it in his hands. "Something on your mind, Deputy Calloway?" Olivia prompted gently. "Been thinking about the future," he said, meeting her eyes. "Never gave it much thought before. Rangers, then bounty hunting was just living day to day. Then I bled all over your skirts and suddenly the future started mattering." Olivia's breath caught. "Frank, let me finish before I lose my nerve." He set his hat aside and took her hands in his. "I'm 33 years old. Spent most of my life chasing down trouble or running from it. Never thought I'd want to stay in one place until I met you." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "This was my mother's. Been carrying it since I left home, never thinking I'd have cause to use it." Inside the box lay a simple gold band with a small pearl. Olivia felt tears spring to her eyes. "I'm not a wealthy man," Frank continued. "Can't offer you the life you had in Boston, but I can promise to love you every day, to respect your independence, and to support your teaching. Wilson needs you, and his voice caught, I need you too." Olivia placed her hand against his cheek. "I didn't come west looking for a husband." "I know that, but I found something better. I found a partner." She smiled through her tears. "Yes, Frank Calloway, I'll marry you." They were married in the spring of 1876 in a ceremony that brought together the entire town. Mrs. Whittaker wept openly, claiming she'd known all along that her boarding house would host a romance. The school board presented them with a plot of land on the edge of town, and the townspeople came together to help build a modest house where Olivia could continue to board students who lived too far to travel daily. Their first year of marriage brought adjustments for both. Frank learned to live within the rhythms of town life after years on the trail, while Olivia adapted to sharing her independence with a partner. They argued sometimes. Frank worried too much about her safety, while Olivia occasionally chafed at the town's expectations of a married woman, but they always found their way back to understanding. In the winter of 1877, tragedy struck when a group of cattle rustlers raided a nearby ranch. Frank led a posse in pursuit, returning 3 days later with a bullet in his shoulder and 2 dead men to bury. Olivia tended his wound, her hands steady despite her fear. "Promised not to get shot again," Frank mumbled as she cleaned the wound. "You promised to come back," Olivia corrected. "And you did." During his recovery, Frank made a decision. "I'm hanging up my guns," he told Olivia one night as they lay in bed. "At least the deputy's badge. Talked to Sheriff Davis about it." Olivia propped herself up on one elbow. "Are you certain you're good at what you do?" "Too good, maybe." Frank stared at the ceiling. "Every time I ride out, I see the fear in your eyes that you try to hide. I don't want to live wondering if each goodbye might be our last." "What will you do instead?" Frank turned to face her. "Davis says the town council's been discussing hiring someone to teach the older boys ranching skills, basic carpentry, things they'll need if they stay in Wilson." "You'd be a teacher?" Olivia's eyes widened. "Frank Calloway, the notorious gunslinger." "Former gunslinger," he corrected with a smile. "And why not? You said yourself I have a way with the troublemakers in your class." Olivia leaned down to kiss him. "I think you'd be wonderful, but only if it's truly what you want." "What I want is a long life with you," he said softly. "Everything else is just details." By summer, Frank had traded his badge for a different kind of responsibility. He taught the older boys practical skills 3 days a week and spent the other days working their small homestead. They planted an orchard and vegetable garden, and Frank built additional rooms onto their house as Olivia's school continued to grow. In the autumn of 1878, Olivia discovered she was expecting their first child. Frank's joy was tempered with worry. Childbirth remained dangerous, especially on the frontier, but Olivia's confidence calmed his fears. "My mother had 5 children with no complications," she assured him. "And we're fortunate to have Dr. Perkins in town now." Frank placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "Still, I'll feel better when the little one is safely here." Their son, James, was born on a stormy night in May 1879. Frank paced outside their bedroom while Dr. Perkins attended Olivia, nearly wearing a path in the floorboards. When he finally held his son, Frank's hands trembled not with pain but with overwhelming love. "He has your eyes," Olivia said tiredly, watching her husband cradle their child. "And your determined chin," Frank replied, sitting carefully beside her. "Thank you." "For what?" "For finding me in that barn, for saying my pain was something to you," he kissed her forehead, "for everything that came after." As Wilson grew from a small settlement into a proper town, the Calloways grew with it. Frank eventually became the town's mayor, his straightforward manner and fair judgment earning respect throughout the county. Olivia expanded her school into an academy that drew students from neighboring communities, never abandoning her commitment to education for all children, regardless of gender or background. They welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth, in 1881, and another son, Thomas, in 1884. Their home became a gathering place for the community, hosting holiday celebrations, school events, and Sunday socials. On rare occasions, someone would pass through town who recognized Frank from his ranger days. These encounters sometimes brought trouble: old enemies seeking revenge, or young gunslingers hoping to make a name by challenging a legend. Frank handled these situations with the wisdom he'd gained, diffusing most without violence and protecting his family and town when necessary. In the summer of 1885, a decade after Olivia had found Frank bleeding in that abandoned barn, they returned to the spot for a picnic with their children. The old barn had long since collapsed, but Frank knew exactly where he'd fallen. While the children played nearby, Frank took Olivia's hand. "Do you ever regret it, helping a half-dead stranger instead of calling the sheriff?" Olivia squeezed his hand. "Not for a single moment, though I still maintain you were the most stubborn patient I ever treated. Just didn't want to bleed all over a pretty lady's skirts," Frank teased. "You did anyway," Olivia reminded him. "I had to discard that petticoat." "Small price to pay for finding the love of my life," he said, his voice growing serious. "You know, when I said it's nothing, I truly believed I'd die in that barn. Then this beautiful, determined woman told me my pain mattered to her, and suddenly I had something to live for." Olivia leaned against his shoulder, watching their children chase butterflies in the tall grass. "And now look at all we have to live for." "A whole lifetime," Frank agreed, wrapping his arm around her waist. "And it still doesn't feel like enough time with you." As the Texas sun began its descent, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the Calloway family gathered their picnic and headed back toward Wilson. Frank lifted little Thomas onto his shoulders while James ran ahead, and Olivia carried Elizabeth. They made a striking picture against the sunset, the former gunslinger and the Boston schoolteacher who had built a life neither could have imagined before fate brought them together in a forgotten barn on the Texas frontier. Years would pass, children would grow, and Wilson would continue to evolve, but the foundation remained strong. A love born when one person's pain became something that mattered to another. When it's nothing transformed into "it's something to me" words that had changed both their lives forever.